One of the key announcements from yesterday's COVID-19 Multi-Ministry Task Force press conference was Singapore's roadmap to enter phase 3 of our safe reopening.
That's right. Well, Education Minister and co-chair of the task force, Lawrence Wong, said Singapore will have to keep its guard up and meet several key conditions.
To recap these conditions, well, first, Singaporeans will have to stick to safe management measures, including small group sizes, safe distancing, and exercising social responsibility.
Next, testing will be carried out on a larger scale to allow more activities to resume. For starters, a pilot scheme will see people undergo rapid COVID-19 tests before they're allowed to attend events.
And lastly, more venues will require people to check in using the TraceTogether app or tokens.
Well, Health Minister Gan Kim Yong cautioned that Phase 3 is not a declaration of victory and we shouldn't go around celebrating and forget about the measures.
Professor Teo Yik Ying joins us now. He's the Dean of the Swee Hock School of Public Health at the National University of Singapore.
Now, Professor, according to the task force, this is what Phase 3 could look like. Gatherings outside homes could be increased to 8 people and 8 visitors could be allowed on home visits. Capacity limits in certain venues may be increased as well.
Is this how Phase 3 should look like then, Prof? Does this plan reflect how calibrated and cautious Singapore's reopening approach has been?
Thanks for having me. I think it's important to highlight that Phase 3 will not be a static phase, but it will be dynamic, very much like what we have in Phase 2. There's constant tweaks, there are changes to the rules we have, and even the way we implement some of these rules. And I think we need to realize that Singapore remains one of the few countries in the world where we have the chance to consider greater degree of reopening, of easing our measures. In many parts of the world, I'm pretty sure people realize that the situation has only gotten worse. So from the very beginning, we talk about the possibility of having repeated lockdowns, perhaps not nationwide, but definitely some sectors need to be shut again after reopening. We've definitely seen this happen in Europe, in North America, even in some of the countries in Asia Pacific like New Zealand, Australia, that have contained the situation very well. Singapore has been fortunate. We did not need to shut down again after reopening. And I think there's a reason for this. It's because we take small, cautious steps, experimenting what works, what didn't. Like the parks and the beaches, we need to implement registration for crowd control. And I think this is what I mean when I say that the situation will continue to change even when we are in Phase 3. Right now, of course, everyone is excited about having gatherings of up to 8 people. And of course, some will complain, why stop at 8? Why not more than 8? But I think at the end of the day, it is a choice we have to make. We open up too quickly, there will be a greater risk to much faster spread in the community because it can spread within a couple of weeks if there's a lot of easing and people are allowed to move more unrestricted in more unrestricted manner. If we open up cautiously, if there is a spread in the community, it happens slower and it's more manageable by our contact tracing, our testing, and our quarantine procedures. Certainly, it doesn't make sense to move to Phase 3 lifting only to return to Phase 2, Phase 1, or even a circuit breaker just a few weeks after.
Right. Well, Prof, many announcements from last night's press conference, but let's focus on the upcoming pilot program for pre-event testing. If it's successful and, of course, if all the other conditions are met as well, is this pre-event testing a dominant factor of how soon we can enter Phase 3?
Well, I see this pre-event testing as one component of a suite of measures. So I don't see it as a dominant factor or a crucial determining factor because people attending large-scale events will still need to keep to measures such as mask wearing, social distancing, some requirements on the venues and locations to properly handle large groups of people. So it isn't that we are now giving up all of these important measures just because we have pre-event testing now. So one important difference with pre-event testing, I think it's the proposed use of antigen rapid tests, which are cheaper, faster to deploy, potentially less accurate, but I think there is a 2-stage protocol that we're talking about here, where people who are attending this will be tested with an antigen rapid test. Those who subsequently test positive will be confirmed with a PCR swab test.
Well, here's another condition laid out by the task force. More venues will require us to check in to safe entry using the TraceTogether app or tokens. In fact, checking in with only the app or token will be mandatory by the end of December.
Now, so this means we will no longer be able to gain entry to these places by scanning safe entry QR codes with phone cameras or through the SingPass mobile app or barcodes on the NRRC.
That's right. So, Professor Teo, we're also targeting to start phase 3 by the end of 2020. So, comparing both timelines, the phase 3 timeline and I guess the timeline or the deadline, so to speak, to start, the TraceTogether, the mandatory TraceTogether check-ins, should the TraceTogether check-ins be brought forward to ensure that, we're completely ready to start phase 3?
Well, actually, in many workplace settings, TraceTogether is already made mandatory. For example, I work in NUS. It is mandatory for me to have TraceTogether downloaded and active on my phone. So the expected start on the compulsory use of TraceTogether by the end of the year, actually, I believe it's to allow the distribution of the TraceTogether tokens. And I see this as how Singapore usually works, to give you an early heads up on what is going to be required, necessary, so people can get ready, as well as the systems, including public spaces, can prepare. We're already near the end of October anyway, so this already gives us a sense when phase 3 could come in, perhaps in the next few weeks, provided that the adoption of TraceTogether, whether it is through the mobile phone or whether it is through the collection of the tokens, can happen efficiently over the next few weeks. I think if we forcefully try and bring forward the deadline of adopting this use of TraceTogether as an entry requirement to public spaces without giving people the time to adapt or to collect their tokens, I don't think that will be the right way to execute a national policy that will affect people's movement, everyone's movement within the country.